Welcome back to Bazooka Kickboxing and MMA. In today's episode, I'm going to review the uppercut. I'm going to talk about some common mistakes and a few keys for you to land them more effectively and with more power.
Bazooka Joe Valtellini.
In my opinion, we don't see the uppercut enough. We tend to rely on straight punches and hooks, which ends up being more easier for your opponent to block. But what makes the uppercut so effective is the angle it's thrown at. It's very difficult to see as well as block. If you think if I'm blocking, I'm used to having vertical pillars to block, which is good for straight punches and round punches, but it always has an opening. I have to squeeze my elbows or really turn my body to block the uppercut. Let's discuss some of the common mistakes when throwing the uppercut. The biggest one has to be standing too tall. Especially when we're fighting in kickboxing and Muay Thai, we have a tendency to want to stand tall because we're kick fighting, blocking kicks. But to land a good, powerful uppercut, you need to be able to have that bend in the legs. By standing really tall, I don't get that weight transfer and the power. Because ideally, to get an uppercut, I need to be closer to my opponent. By standing tall, I get no power to come in. But now when I lower my base, you can see how I can get my head closer to my opponent. Here, use my legs, and I can get that big power. Squatting, using the legs. Up here, good for kick fighting. The biggest weapon from standing tall in that up position has to be the knees. So by standing tall, it's better to mix here with the knee. If I'm inside, I can lower my base and get that uppercut. The second mistake we see is having our shoulder position too square. Again, we're used to fighting kickboxing and Muay Thai. We stand really tall here. Good for elbows, good for blocking, but it takes away good punching power. So by having the shoulder square, I could be lowering my base, but you can see very predictable and no good power and rotation. So in order to get a good uppercut, I have to mask the technique. So instead of being here to throw it, I need to hide, get my lead shoulder in front. This way you don't see this hand. I can be in here, mix in a feint, and you can see how I drop my hand to throw that uppercut. If I'm standing really square, again, I have no power. I have to make sure, one, I get my hand a little lower and I hide it. So boom, you can't see the technique. By not getting my shoulders too square, I can either start with a left hook, a lead hook. This way it kind of narrows my center line and hides that room for the uppercut. Okay? Or I can use a lead side feint to hide it again and get that power. So either I throw the hook to get that power or mix in the feint to drive, lower my base and get close. Okay? All about good shoulder line, hiding the uppercut. The last mistake I see a lot of people make when throwing the uppercut is the position of the forearm. In order to land a good uppercut, I need to make sure my forearm is nice and vertical. I need to be able to slip right up the middle. Too many times if I'm square or I'm not using my legs, you see a lot of uppercuts come up on an angle. So one of the coaching tips I like to give is I use the coaching cue corkscrew. So by corkscrewing my hand, you can see it forces my elbow in, and this way I'm able to get a nice vertical uppercut. So the way a lot of people tend to throw them, here, okay? Look straight, slightly on an angle. But when you want to make sure you throw them, the corkscrew, you can see how nicely I get it. Now, if I'm lined up here with Matt and his guard's up, right? If I'm here, I hit the arm. But by using that corkscrew, you can see it just gets nicely right up the middle, all right? So from here, make sure we use shoulder angles, we're breathing, and we're focusing on the corkscrew, okay? Now that we've talked about the mistakes, it's important to know the keys to landing a successful uppercut, and it comes in the setup. As I mentioned, the squareness and not bending the legs all comes up in the setup to get into that power position. So again, if I want to box, I might lower my base and sneak in those uppercuts, right? So that position changes. Or I could use jabs, lead hands, to create a reaction, get my opponent to think the hook's coming, and then I drive that uppercut. And one of the best setups to land the uppercut is with round punches. So if I, for example, come here and I throw a hard straight or a hard hook, and then I throw a hard straight punch, all of a sudden the third punch, they're thinking it's either a hook or a straight punch, and then all of a sudden I come in and I mix the uppercut. So bring round attacks, straight attacks, create a distraction, slip the punch right up the middle. The second key to a successful uppercut is the stepping in the footwork. I need to be able to transfer that power. So let's take a look at the footwork. Because the uppercut is really a closer range weapon, I need to close the distance. So if I'm at the distance for a right straight, you can see how far I am. But now to land the uppercut, I need to close a good bit of distance. So what I need to do now is use my lead hand to help me close the distance, or feinting, or any way that I can edge my feet closer to my opponent. I can step with jabs, I close my distance, but I step with my lead side. Now to generate that power as the uppercut comes, I step with that back foot up to close distance, right? If I throw from too far, you can see I got no hip and I got no transfer of weight. So stepping in, boom, right? Close distance, bring your weight in. Or if I want, I can get my setup, work my way inside, lower my base, and I could attack that way as well. Okay, so it's all using that footwork. Step, back foot travel for power, and then I could exit out. The last key to landing successful uppercuts is creating slight angles in your footwork. If I'm lined up with my opponent and the hands are up, we're matching our forearms. So everything he throws, it's matched, very easy to block. But some of the best boxers, we've seen Mike Tyson, the Lomachenkos, all like to create angles, and they use the shuffle step to create it. So once they have their opponent shelled up here, right, the attention's here, they're blocking their head. This is where mixing in those little shuffles will get your uppercut up the middle. So whether I could attack off on the lead side uppercut, I take a nice right angle. Set up here, one of my favorites, angled shuffle, boom, I could attack up the center line. So the key is taking my angle, right, to step across. So now, again, my arms and forearms aren't matched with my opponent. I'm slightly over, this way the uppercut goes right down the middle. So nicely from here, as soon as it's here, angled shuffle step, attack up the middle. But it all comes up in that setup as well. I need to get my opponent to block punches. So either with jabs, hooks, reaction, boom, uppercut right up the middle. And that's probably one of the most successful and easiest ways to land the uppercut. Get your opponent to shell, angle off, boom. Opponent to shell, bang, angled uppercuts.